He counts 223 steps. That's all it takes for a 6-year-old boy to disappear. It's the last day before a long weekend. New York City, 1979. A woman named Julie stands at her apartment door. Her son begs her for something small, something every kid on that block already gets to do. Walk to the bus stop alone, just this once. She says yes. He grabs his book bag, $1 in his pocket, for a soda at the corner store. He steps outside, turns right, half a block, crosses the street. One more block, crosses again. 223 steps in total. That's the whole distance between his front door and the bus stop where the other kids are already lining up. His mother watches him go. She can see the bus stop from her window. She sees the other children gathering. She goes back inside. She never sees her son again. His name is Etan Patz. And if you think you already know this story, you're wrong. Most people who've heard of him think of one image: a small, smiling face printed on the side of a milk carton, the missing boy who was never found. But that's not where this story ends. That's barely where it begins. Because what happened to Etan didn't just break one family, it changed the way an entire country protects its children. Before that morning, kids walked to school alone all the time. Nobody thought twice about it. After that morning, something shifted. Parents started watching the corner a little longer, started walking their kids that extra block. A quiet fear moved into millions of homes, and it never really left. And here's the part almost nobody talks about. The real horror of this case isn't just that a child vanished. It's what happened after. A justice system that had every chance to stop a predator and let him slip through its fingers again and again for years. By the afternoon of that first day, his parents realized something is wrong. He never came home from school. His friends say he never even made it to the bus stop that morning. Within hours, their apartment turns into a command center. Detectives, phones ringing. Officers are knocking on every door on the block. They search basements, rooftops, storm drains. They question everyone who worked anywhere near that route: store clerks, delivery men, neighbors. Thousands of leads. Every single one goes nowhere. Weeks pass, then months. His face starts showing up on flyers taped to storefronts, stapled to telephone poles. And then something happens that has never really been done before. His picture ends up printed on a carton of milk, sitting on breakfast tables in homes that have nothing to do with this case at all. He becomes one of the very first children in the country to get that kind of attention. Not because anyone wanted it that way, because nothing else had worked. Here's the detail that should stop you cold. This wasn't some remote road, some empty stretch of woods. This was Soho, crowded sidewalks, busy shops, people everywhere. A boy disappeared in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses who saw nothing. Hundreds of people walked those same steps the same morning, and not one of them can tell the police what happened to him. His parents refuse to let the story fade. They keep his case in the news year after year, long after most people would have given up hope. And because they do, something bigger starts to happen. Missing children across the country are starting to get more attention. Laws start to change. An entire national system for finding lost kids traces its roots back to this one small boy from Soho. But here's the question that should be keeping you up at night. If a case became this famous, if it changed laws, changed how a whole country thinks about missing kids, why did it take more than 30 years to even get close to an answer? Somewhere out there, someone knew exactly what happened to Etan Patz, and that person was closer than anyone ever imagined. This isn't just the story of a boy who vanished. It's the story of how close the people who could have stopped it really were, and how long it took anyone to notice. A drainage tunnel under New York City. That's where the police find him, living underground, surrounded by trash, and photographs of children he has no business having. His name is Jose Ramos. By now, detectives have been searching for months, sleeping at their desks, knocking on the same doors twice, 3 times, hoping someone remembers one more detail. This case has stopped feeling like a job. For some of these men, it's become personal. One detective has a son, the exact same age as the missing boy. Every night he goes home, he says, he feels like he's failed his own child. Then a name surfaces, and everything changes. Ramos isn't a stranger to the police. He has a long history of targeting children. He's been caught before, more than once. And when officers search where he's been staying, they find something that stops them cold. Photographs of young boys. Boys who look disturbingly similar to the child everyone in this city is searching for. Investigators start connecting threads. Ramos was known to spend time in a park not far from where the boy vanished. A woman who was close to him at the time had even walked that same child to school more than once, in the weeks before he disappeared. And then Ramos says something that no one expects. He tells a federal prosecutor he remembers a small boy approaching him the same week near that same park. He says he took the boy back to his apartment, and when he's shown a photo of the missing child, Ramos says he's 90% sure this is the boy he means. 90%, from the man's own mouth. For a moment, it feels like the case is finally about to close. But here's where the story turns. A confession like this, even one this specific, isn't the same as proof. Prosecutors need more. They need something that ties Ramos to that boy beyond a single blurry memory from a man with every reason to lie, minimize, or simply misremember. And no matter how many times investigators go back to him, no matter how many years pass, that missing piece never appears. Years turn into decades. Ramos goes on to serve time for a different crime, in a different state entirely. But for this case, the one that made his name infamous, he is never charged, not once. The family refuses to accept that as the end. In 2001, more than 20 years after their son vanished, they did something almost unthinkable. They go to court and ask a judge to declare their own son legally dead. Not because they've found an answer, because without that ruling, they can't take the next step. They can't sue the man they believe took him. Imagine sitting in that courtroom, signing papers that end any last thread of hope you've been holding on to. Not because you've given up, but because it's the only path left toward justice. They win that lawsuit. A court formally rules that Ramos caused their son's death. But a civil ruling isn't a criminal conviction. Ramos would never spend a single day in prison for this case. He remained insulated behind the walls of a Pennsylvania facility on an unrelated sentence, leaving the family with a verdict, but no true ending. And here's the question that should be eating at you right now. If the system already had its suspect, a known predator, in the right place, with a partial confession already on record, why did an entire generation pass with the real answer still locked away? Somewhere, in a life no one is watching, a very different man is carrying a secret. Not a stranger from a park, someone far closer to that quiet corner store than anyone has ever thought to look. The case everyone believed was as good as solved isn't solved at all. It's about to break wide open, and almost nobody sees it coming. A poem sits on a detective's desk. Just a few lines about a mother and a missing boy. He reads it once, then again. And something in him decides he has to work this case. It's the late 1990s, almost 20 years since anyone last saw that boy alive. The file has been sitting untouched for so long that some of the paper has started to yellow. This detective's name is Phil Mahoney, and what he inherits isn't a fresh trail. It's boxes, stacks of old reports tangled together, some of them barely organized at all. His first job isn't chasing a suspect. It's simply putting the case back in order. He starts reading through years-old tips. Most of them go nowhere. One caller insists the boy was taken by a cult out in the suburbs and killed there. Another claims he was spotted alive, halfway across the country. Mahoney chases every one of them down. Every single one dead ends. This is what a cold case actually looks like. Not one big breakthrough, just a man, alone with a mountain of paper, refusing to let a boy stay forgotten. Years pass. The file grows thicker. Still, no answer. Then, in 2012, everything changes, but not in the way anyone expects. Investigators get a new lead, not about the man everyone had long suspected, a different man entirely, someone who used to work near where the boy vanished. Cameras roll as crews break ground at his old work site. News vans line the street. The whole country watches as investigators dig beneath the pavement, searching for remains after more than 30 years. For 5 straight days, they dig. They find nothing. On paper, it looks like just another dead end in a case already full of them. But That dig does something none of the earlier tips ever managed. It puts this boy's face back on every television in New York City. And somewhere, in a quiet home far from all those cameras, one man is watching those broadcasts a little too closely. He isn't a stranger to this case. He's family, related by marriage to someone he's grown increasingly afraid of. For years, he's carried something heavy. Things he's heard. Things that never quite sat right. He's stayed silent about it, the way people do when they aren't sure, when they don't want to believe the worst about someone they know. But watching this story flood back onto every screen in the city breaks something loose in him. He picks up the phone. He tells the police he needs to talk about his brother-in-law. Investigators have taken thousands of calls on this case over the decades. Almost none of them ever led anywhere. But something about this one is different. This isn't a stranger with a theory. This is family sounding scared about someone he sees at holidays. They ask him the man's name. He gives them a name nobody investigating this case has ever heard before. A man with no criminal record, living an unremarkable life, just a short drive from where it all began. While an entire country looked away, he sat in plain sight. And tonight, he has no idea his own family just picked up the phone. Before we go any further, if this story has you hooked, hit like and subscribe, because cases like this one deserve to be seen. Drop a comment and let me know which country you're watching from tonight. And if you want more solved cases just like this, I've linked a few more below in the description. Now, back to the story. The knock comes early, before dawn, in a quiet New Jersey neighborhood. A man opens his door, and it's like he's been waiting for this moment for over 30 years. His name is Pedro Hernandez. Investigators tell him they're looking into an old case from New York City. They don't even finish the sentence. His face goes pale. All the color just drains out of it, right there in the doorway. He agrees to go with them. No hesitation, no lawyer. He walks out to the car on his own. At the station, he talks for hours, but nobody turns on a camera and no lawyer sits in the room. Just Hernandez, the investigators, and a space nobody else will ever fully know. Then, finally, someone flips a switch. The camera starts rolling, and what comes out of his mouth stops the room cold. He says he saw a boy standing near the store where he worked that morning, waiting for a bus. He says he offered him a soda, told him to follow him downstairs, into the basement, to get it. Then, in a voice that barely changes, he describes what happened next. He put his hands on the boy's neck. He held on. And when he let go, the boy wasn't moving anymore. "What made you do this?" someone asks him. "I don't know," he says. "It was something that just happened." Investigators hand him the boy's old missing poster, the same one that hung in store windows for years. Hernandez picks up a pen, and he writes 2 words across it. "I'm sorry." But he isn't finished. He tells them what he did after. He says he placed the boy inside a box, carried it out, left it on a street corner not far from the store. And that's when the room goes quiet. Because for years, investigators had searched basements, dug up sidewalks, torn apart buildings block by block, looking for any trace of that boy. And the entire time, the answer was almost insultingly simple. That box, sitting on a curb in New York City, would have been picked up by the same garbage trucks that came through every single week. No burial, no hiding spot, just an ordinary Tuesday pickup, erasing what could have been the only evidence anyone would ever need. That single detail explains 33 years of nothing, 33 years of digging. In the wrong places, chasing the wrong men, standing just blocks away from an answer that had already been thrown out with the trash. Hernandez walks investigators through it all again, this time in person. He shows them the door he says he led the boy through, points out where he crossed the street, where he claims he set the box down. By the end of that day, he's under arrest. The story breaks that night. Every major news outlet picks it up within hours. But almost immediately, a very different question starts forming. Those first hours, the ones with no camera, no recording, no lawyer present. What actually happened in that room? Hernandez's own attorney raises it almost right away. He points out that his client has a documented history of mental illness, that he hears voices some people don't, that under the right pressure, in the wrong conditions, A vulnerable mind can sometimes confess to things that never happened at all. It sounds almost impossible to believe. Who confesses in this much specific, disturbing detail to something they didn't do? But it happens, more often than most people realize. And that single unanswered question about what really happened during those unrecorded hours is about to follow this case into a courtroom. A man has confessed, in his own words, on camera, signed and sealed. So why would 12 ordinary people sitting in a jury room spend 18 days arguing over whether to believe him? 12 strangers sit in a room, staring at each other. 18 days. That's how long they've been locked in this argument. Because a man has confessed to a murder, and half of them aren't sure they believe him. This is the trial of Pedro Hernandez. Two very different stories are on the table. One says a guilty man finally broke after decades of carrying what he did. The other says something much harder to accept, that a vulnerable, unwell man can be pushed into confessing to something he never did at all. His defense team lays out their case. They tell the jury Hernandez has a documented mental illness, a low IQ, a mind, they argue, that struggles to separate what's real from what isn't. They point out something unsettling. No other witness that morning remembers seeing a boy standing where Hernandez claims he saw him. Then they raise something even stranger. Hernandez told police he hid part of the boy's belongings, tucked behind equipment in that same store. Investigators searched that space back in 1979. Nothing was ever found there. To the defense, this isn't the story of a killer. It's the story of a broken man, told what to say by his own guilt and his own illness, filling in gaps with details that don't hold up. But prosecutors have one detail the defense can't explain away. When Hernandez walked investigators through the building where he says it happened, he pointed out a doorway that felt out of place to him. He said it hadn't been there before. Prosecutors go back and check the building's history. He's right. That door was added years after 1979. It's a detail buried in old construction records, nowhere in any newspaper, nowhere in any public file. Something, prosecutors argue, that only someone who was actually standing in that basement decades earlier could possibly know. A detail like that is hard to walk back. Still, the jury can't agree. For 18 days, they go back and forth. Twice they tell the judge they're stuck. The third time, the judge accepts it. A mistrial. 11 jurors believe he's guilty. Just one doesn't. That single juror later explains his doubt wasn't about whether Hernandez seemed sorry. It was about those hours before the cameras started rolling, the ones nobody can fully account for. He says it's hard to send someone away for life when a piece of the story will always stay in the dark. For the Patz family, watching this collapse into a hung jury is its own kind of gutting. A confession, a detail investigators say only the real killer could know. And still, no verdict. So, prosecutors do it again. A second trial begins about a year and a half later. Same evidence, same arguments, same excruciating weight as the case goes back to another jury. This time, they don't deadlock. Pedro Hernandez is found guilty. In the courtroom, after nearly 4 decades of not knowing, the boy's father finally speaks the words he's held onto for so long. "We finally have found some measure of justice," he says, "for our wonderful little boy." Hernandez is sentenced to 25 years to life. For a moment, it feels like the story is finally, truly over. A confession, a trial, a conviction, a family after 37 years, hearing a courtroom say the word guilty. But this case has already proven one thing, over and over again. Just when it looks closed, it isn't. And the next twist doesn't come from a new witness, or a hidden clue, or anything anyone could have predicted. It comes from something far more unsettling, a single sentence buried inside a courtroom transcript that no one thought to question, until it was almost too late. 8 years pass in near total silence. Then, without warning, a letter arrives that undoes everything. A federal appeals court has just thrown out the conviction, not because of new evidence, not because anyone found a hole in the confession, because of something buried deep inside the original trial. A single moment almost no one outside a courtroom would ever think twice about. During deliberations, the jury had sent the judge a question. They wanted to know something specific. If part of Hernandez's confession wasn't given freely, if it was coerced, would that taint everything else he said afterward? The judge told them no. Years later, a panel of appellate judges looks at that answer and reaches a different conclusion entirely. They ruled it was wrong, legally wrong. And under the rules that govern a fair trial, an error like that isn't small. It's enough to unravel the whole case. Every judge on that panel agrees, not a split decision. Unanimous. Sit with that for a second. A man confessed to the police, to his own pastor, to his ex-wife, to a camera, in his own words, more than once. And now, a court is saying he may walk free. Not because any of that stopped being true, but because of one flawed instruction years after the fact. Prosecutors aren't ready to let this go. They start preparing for something almost unheard of in a case like this. A third trial, new jury, same confession, same decades-old wound, reopened all over again for a family who thought this chapter had finally closed. But before that trial can even begin, the case takes one more turn. New York prosecutors appeal straight to the Supreme Court, and the nation's highest court agrees to step in. Their ruling isn't about guilt or innocence at all. It's about something much narrower, whether a federal court should have been allowed to overturn a state conviction in the first place. By a vote of 6-3, the justices say no. They rule that federal courts overstepped, second-guessing a state trial they shouldn't have touched. The conviction is reinstated. 3 justices disagree, but the majority holds. Pedro Hernandez remains behind bars, serving out the sentence a jury handed down years earlier. Notice what actually happened here. The Supreme Court didn't re-examine the case, didn't weigh the confession, or the door only a killer could have known about, or any of the evidence that once split a jury 18 days down the middle. They ruled on procedure, on which court gets the final say. The deeper question, whether every word of that confession was real, was never the point being decided at all. For a family who searched for their son for more than 3 decades, that's a strange kind of ending. The conviction stands. The man stays in prison. And yet, the doubt that once split a jury room in half was never actually put to rest. It was simply overruled by a different kind of authority. A boy walked 2 blocks to a bus stop in 1979 and never arrived. Decades of searching. A predator who was never charged. A confession that took a city's breath away. A conviction undone, then restored. Not by truth, but by law. Somewhere in that gap between what the courts decided and what actually happened in a basement all those years ago, one family is still left holding the only thing they ever really got. Not an answer, just a verdict that, for now, is final. And maybe that's the hardest part of this whole story. We want cases like this to end with the truth laid bare. Instead, this one ends with a question that no courtroom ever really answered. Do we believe him because he confessed, or because it was easier to stop looking? That's the question I keep coming back to, and it's the one I want to leave you with. If this case had you thinking the same way, tell me in the comments. Do you believe that confession was real, or do you think those missing hours changed everything? Would you have voted guilty in that jury room, 18 days in, still unsure? And should a court be allowed to undo a conviction like this over a technicality, even with a confession this specific sitting right in front of them? I read every comment, so put your answer down below. And if this is the kind of case that keeps you up at night the way it does me, subscribe, because there's another one just like it next week.